For years, the people of Larket mocked the silent giant Colton James, treating him like a joke, or worse, a threat, simply because he didn't fit their mold. Even the sheriff and town leaders dismissed him, right up until a monstrous danger returned that no one else dared to face. But fate had other plans, and the man they ignored stepped forward alone. Just wait until you see how this story turns and why justice finally found its voice. Nobody in Larket County ever took Colton James seriously. He was too much of everything the town didn't understand. Too tall to blend in, too quiet to explain himself, too strange to be part of their easy jokes and morning gossip. Standing well over 6.5 feet with shoulders like cedar beams and boots that thudded with every step, Colton didn't just enter a room. He changed its pressure. But he rarely entered any rooms. He stayed away mostly. Lived at the farthest edge of town in a dented silver trailer that hadn't seen paint in a decade, parked beside a patch of land no one wanted. It was half field, half weeds, and fully forgotten. Just like him. His only company was a stubborn trio of mules he raised in the old barn his father built before he passed. Most days, if you listened close, you'd hear Colton talking to them in a soft, low drawl. Stories, questions, even jokes sometimes. Folks called it odd, strange. One woman once said she saw him braid the mule's mane like it was a child's hair. After that, whispers spread faster than rain in dry dirt. The kids in town called him the Giant, and not in the friendly fairy tale way. They'd whisper it like a dare to stand close to him. He always walked with his head down, arms heavy at his sides, face set in a look that could have been calm or angry. Nobody could ever tell. The men had other names for him, most of them not fit to print, but none of it ever seemed to reach Colton, or maybe he just chose not to hear. Every fall, the town held its pride and joy, the Larket County Harvest Fair. It was more than a celebration. It was a stage. Every man came ready to show off what made him worth watching. They brought their fastest horses, their strongest sons, their hottest chili, their firmest handshakes. Local businesses donated prizes. The sheriff ran the contests, and the mayor gave speeches that made everyone clap even when they weren't listening. But no one ever invited Colton, not once. Every year, invitations were sent out. Some handwritten, some spoken aloud at the cafe or during Sunday service. But somehow the mayor always forgot about the man in the trailer. "We don't need him scaring the kids," Sheriff Jenkins once muttered when asked about it. "He smells like wet hay and looks like a prison break." The line got some laughs around the table. It always did. Still, Colton came anyway. Not to compete, not to eat, not to prove anything. He just showed up. Walking slow through the gravel lot with that same worn coat and a sun-faded hat pulled low over his eyes. He stood at the edge of the fair, right by the split-rail fence that framed the corral, arms folded, silent, observing, like he was watching something only he understood. And that's when it started. At first, it was just the kids. A few peanut shells tossed his way, followed by stifled giggles. One bold boy mimicked his walk, dragging his feet and swinging his arms, earning a round of laughter. Then came the adults, or at least the ones who acted like they'd never left the schoolyard. A drunk rancher, red-faced and sweating from the pie-eating contest, shouted loud enough for the whole crowd to hear, "Hey, Sasquatch! You teach the mules to read yet? Or are they still the smart ones in the barn?" The laughter that followed was cruel in that casual way small towns perfect. Not sharp, but steady, and full of that shared delight that someone else was the punchline. Even a few of the women chuckled behind their hands, the way folks do when they don't want to be seen laughing but won't miss the chance either. Colton didn't flinch, didn't look over, didn't blink. He just stood there like a statue carved from the side of a cliff. The only thing that moved was the wind tugging gently at his coat, because that's what Colton did best. He didn't fight. He endured Dot. The sun had just begun to fall behind the cottonwoods, casting long golden shadows across the fairground when the sound of screeching tires sliced through the music and chatter. A battered green pickup, doors dented, hood scorched with rust, skidded into the gravel lot, fishtailing before slamming to a halt near the judge's tent. Dust billowed in all directions. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. The driver's side door burst open and out stumbled Joe Griffin, a local farmer known more for his quiet nerves than loud entrances. But not today. Joe's boots slipped on the gravel, his hands were shaking, and his face, usually ruddy from sun, was white as chalk. His eyes darted like cornered prey. "He's back!" he cried, voice cracking. "He's back, and he's coming this way!" He tore through my fences, took down 3 of my cows like they were nothing. He looked around desperately, breath shallow. "The boar!" he shouted again, louder. "The one with the scar!" People froze. Every adult in Larkett County knew the story. Some had lived it. Others tried to forget. 3 years earlier, a wild boar had thundered out of the eastern woods, unlike anything folks had ever seen. Massive, brutal, unstoppable. He was longer than a full-grown bull, tusks like curved knives, with a deep scar that ran along his side like someone had carved a question mark into his hide. That's how he got his name, Hook. Hook didn't just tear up crops. He crushed fences. He gutted cattle. He even rammed a sheriff's truck off the road once. For weeks, the county lived in a kind of hushed panic. Then came the fire, a wildfire that scorched half the eastern ridge. And after that, Hook vanished. Folks assumed nature had done what no one else could. They were wrong. Gasps turned to shouts. Parents snatched up their kids. People spilled their drinks, knocking over folding chairs as they scrambled. The local pastor muttered a prayer. 3 men ran for their trucks, fumbling for gun cases in the back seat. Fear didn't need a second invitation. Everyone moved, except one. Colton James stood still, right by the fence, where he'd stood all afternoon, watching. Then, without a word, he pulled off his long coat. The crowd saw something none of them expected. Beneath that dust-covered layer was an old, sun-bleached military flak vest, scratched, scarred, but secure. Strapped to his hip, a thick-bladed survival knife. Tied across his back, a coil of heavy rope. He took 1 step forward, then another. His boots stirred the gravel, steady as thunder. "Where do you think you're going?" barked Sheriff Jenkins, hand twitching near his sidearm. Colton didn't stop. He didn't even look the sheriff in the eye. His gaze was fixed straight ahead, past the tents and tables, past the rustling field, toward the dark line of trees beyond the fairgrounds. His voice, when he spoke, was low, calm, like it wasn't fear he carried, but duty. "He's not getting to town," he said. "Not tonight." And with that, he walked. Alone, straight into the trees. 10 minutes passed. 15, and still, nothing. The fairgrounds, once alive with music and shouts, now stood wrapped in silence. Conversations died mid-sentence. The air grew thick with worry. People stood in uneven clusters, some holding tools, others just holding each other, their eyes glued to the shadowed edge of the forest. A few brave souls had climbed onto tailgates for a better view, but even they didn't speak. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that hums in your ears when fear takes root. Then, a sound. Faint at first, like something snapping under too much weight. Then came another, louder, sharper, a low, distant rumble, like thunder cracking over dry brush. Then the unmistakable cry of something not quite human, not a scream, not a howl, but a roar that shook through the bones. Something powerful, something primal. A few horses bucked nervously in their pens. Chickens squawked and flapped inside crates. Somewhere near the raffle tent, a child whimpered, clutching her mother's leg. Then came the crash, heavy, sudden, final, like a tree falling the wrong way or a barn wall giving out. And then, nothing again. A silence that felt even louder than the noise that came before it. All eyes stayed locked on the woods. Some braced for a charge. Others began to whisper prayers under their breath. And then they saw him. Colton James stepped out from between the trees, moving slowly, like a ghost rising from the earth. His flannel shirt was ripped open at the side, soaked through with sweat and dirt. His face was streaked with red, and there was a cut above his brow that still glistened under the fading light. One boot dragged slightly with each step, his right leg stiff. But what stopped everyone cold, what made time itself hesitate, was what he carried. Across his shoulders, like a hunter returning from some ancient quest, lay the lifeless body of the beast. Hook, the monster of their stories. The nightmare that had prowled their fields and taken their livestock. 1,100 pounds of muscle, tusk, and rage, now limp, now silent. Colton's arms trembled beneath the weight, but he held firm. His spine didn't bend. His head didn't drop. He walked straight through the center of the fairground, the way a man does when he has nothing left to prove. People parted without thinking, creating a path in the gravel as wide as a road. No one spoke, no one dared. When he reached the square, the very center of the town's celebration, where hours ago pies were judged and hands were shaken, he bent his knees slightly and let the carcass slide off his shoulders, landing with a dull thud. Dust curled up from beneath it. Still, no one moved. Colton stood over the beast for a moment, chest rising and falling. Then he looked up, voice steady but low. "It's done," he said. That was all. He didn't need to say more. No cheers broke out. There was no applause, no whooping. The silence remained heavy and awed. It wasn't that people didn't want to clap. They simply didn't remember how. They were too stunned, too shaken by what they'd just witnessed. Sheriff Jenkins, who only an hour earlier had called Colton a problem, took off his hat without a word, held it to his chest. A teenager near the corral whispered, "Holy," but didn't finish the sentence. Even the dogs, restless and pacing before, now sat still, watching, almost respectful. And the kids, the same ones who'd mocked him just hours ago, stared like they were seeing something impossible, their eyes wide, their mouths open, like someone had dropped a superhero into the center of their quiet, dusty town. But Colton James didn't want their praise. He just wanted peace. The next morning, the harvest fair didn't feel like the same place. Something subtle had shifted, not in the decorations or the music, but in the way people stood, in the way they looked at one another. It was in the hush that passed over the crowd when his boots touched gravel again. Colton James, same old coat, same hat, same heavy steps. But everything else around him had changed. He didn't walk to the edge of the fence this time. He didn't need to. Before he even reached the tents, the mayor himself stepped forward, holding out a paper cup of hot coffee like it was a medal of honor. "Mornin', Mr. James," he said with a softness not often heard in his voice. "This one's on the house." Colton nodded. That was enough. Not far behind him came Sheriff Jenkins. His face was still ruddy from yesterday, part sunburn, part embarrassment, and in his hands was a small velvet box. With an awkward cough, he opened it and revealed a brass star, etched with the words, "Citizens Valor Award." No speech, no ceremony, just a quiet gesture. "Guess we misjudged you," Jenkins mumbled. Colton took the medal, studied it for a moment, and slipped it into his pocket without a word. Then came Randy Harper. The same man who'd laughed the loudest yesterday was now shifting from boot to boot, holding a box with a tag that read, "Custom, size 15." A brand new pair of leather boots, polished to a shine. I was out of line yesterday," Randy said, voice cracking slightly. "Figured a man who carried that beast out of the woods deserves more than just sorry words." Colton accepted the box with a small nod. Again, no big speech. He didn't need one. And then came the kids. They trailed him like ducklings behind a quiet old swan, wide-eyed and whispering among themselves. One brave boy asked if it was true Colton didn't even blink when he saw the boar. Another asked to see the scar on his arm. One little girl, no older than 7, slipped a flower into the side pocket of his coat and said, "You're stronger than the rodeo guys." Colton didn't say much. He never did. But as the morning sun lit up the square, someone caught the moment his mouth curved just slightly at the edges. It wasn't much, just a flicker. But it was enough. He smiled. Once. From that day on, folks in Larkett County remembered him differently. The man who used to stand on the outskirts of town now stood quietly in its center. Not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. He hadn't asked for their attention. He'd never begged for their trust. But when it mattered most, he had stepped forward without needing a reason, without wanting applause. And that changed people. They started seeing quiet men through a different lens. They stopped assuming that silence meant weakness, or that the ones who spoke the least had nothing worth hearing. They began to recognize that sometimes the strongest hearts are the ones that beat unnoticed. That some battles are won not with noise, but with presence. Nobody laughed at the giant anymore, because now they all remembered the moment when the man they'd once dismissed carried an 1,100-pound symbol of fear across his shoulders, and laid it down like it was nothing. They remembered how one man did what no one else dared. No one wanted the giant cowboy, not until he reminded them what real strength looks like. Not until he shouldered the wild and came back standing tall. And after that day, Larkett County never forgot his name.